Have you ever wondered if a single moment, a single choice, could rewrite your entire life? Could redemption be hidden in the least likely place? Jericho was a city famed for its walls, double-layered, towering fortresses of mud brick and stone, wide enough to hold houses between them. These weren't just walls of defense, they were monuments to human pride, decadence, and fear. The city thrived on trade and commerce, and its elite lived in luxury, indulging in the pagan worship of Canaanite gods like Baal and Asherah. And on those walls lived a woman named Rahab. Her home was built directly into the city's outer perimeter, a place of both strategic convenience and symbolic exclusion. For while she entertained the powerful men of Jericho, she was never one of them. Her title was well known, Rahab the Harlot, and yet behind the eyes painted in kohl and the silks, draped over her door, there was more than a woman of the night. There was a watcher, a listener, a soul seeking truth in a city of lies. Rahab's house was the epicenter of whispers. Soldiers, merchants, emissaries, they all came to her, not only for her body, but to boast of rumors and fears. She collected these fragments like a weaver gathering threads, building a tapestry of something the city dismissed. Change was coming, and Rahab was ready. Though society labeled her with shame, Rahab had become a silent power in Jericho. Her beauty was matched by her intelligence, her resourcefulness honed by years of navigating men's lust and the city's gossip. She had learned to survive with poise, but survival isn't the same as living. The religious rituals in Jericho revolved around fertility cults and human sacrifice. Their worship was decadent, bloody, and transactional. Rahab often wondered, what kind of God demands the blood of infants and the cries of the enslaved? Were the gods truly listening? And if they were, why was her heart still so hollow? Then came the stories. First whispers, then shouts of fear, of a people who had escaped Egypt, defying Pharaoh, splitting the Red Sea, and marching with a cloud by day and fire by night. Their God was invisible yet tangible, and unlike Baal, this God wasn't confined to statues. He was alive. When Rahab heard of the destruction of the Amorite kings, Sihon and Og, she didn't rejoice like the others. She trembled. If God could do that to kings, she thought, what chance does Jericho have? Others dismissed the Israelites as desert lunatics. Rahab knew better. This wasn't superstition. It was prophecy in motion, and prophecy had come knocking. One humid evening, as lanterns glowed across the city's towers, two travel-worn men approached Rahab's door. There was something different about them. Their eyes scanned the streets, like seasoned soldiers, but there was also an urgency, like men with a mission. Rahab recognized fear wrapped in boldness. She had seen it in the eyes of runaways, not mercenaries. Without a word, she ushered them inside. The moment the door closed, a silence settled. She offered wine. They declined. They sat not like customers, but scouts. One of them finally broke the stillness. "We come in the name of the God of Israel." The words ignited something in her chest. "I know who you are," Rahab whispered. "You're spies." They tensed, but she didn't raise an alarm. Instead, she said, "Our hearts have melted. All of Jericho is terrified. I've heard what your God did at the Red Sea and to the kings beyond the Jordan. No God of Canaan compares." The spies were stunned. A Canaanite prostitute speaking in reverence of Yahweh. That night, they found not only refuge, but a partner. The illusion of secrecy did not last long. Word spread in the city. Foreign men had entered through the gates, and their steps had led to Rahab's house. The king's messengers arrived before dawn, armor clanking, hands on sword hilts. "Bring out the men who came to you. They're spies." Rahab's heart pounded, but her face remained composed. She stepped outside, her robe hastily wrapped, feigning confusion. "They were here," she said, pointing toward the city gate, "but they left before it closed for the night. If you hurry, you may catch them." The soldiers swore and ran toward. The plains beyond the gate, behind her closed door, under the flax stalks drying on her rooftop, the spies held their breath. They were safe, because Rahab had chosen to risk her life for them. Why? Because she believed, not in men, not in Israel, but in their God. As the stars blinked above the rooftops of Jericho, Rahab climbed the stairs. The two spies stood, eyes sharp. Still unsure whether to trust her, she walked toward them with fire in her voice. "I have shown you kindness. Now swear to me by the Lord your God that you'll spare my family when your army comes." The boldness in her voice was startling. She wasn't pleading, she was declaring, "My father, my mother, my brothers and sisters, promise me their lives." The spies, moved by her conviction, nodded. "Our lives for yours, but only if you keep our secret and mark your house with this scarlet cord." Rahab took the red rope, the same one she had used to lower many guests discreetly through her window in the past, and tied it with trembling hands. Not for escape, but for salvation. That rope, once a symbol of shame, now became her covenant. Dawn broke gently across the plains, gilding the top of Jericho's walls in molten gold. Below, the city stirred, unaware that its fate had been sealed by the trembling hands of a woman who once trafficked in shadows. Rahab knelt by the window of her house, carefully tying the scarlet cord, the signal of her covenant with the God of Israel. It hung like a slash of hope against the stone wall, swaying gently in the breeze, unnoticed by the masses who passed below. Yet, in the unseen realm, it was brighter than a torch. Heaven saw it. So did the angels. That cord, a deep red like blood, now carried the weight of salvation. Not just for her, but for her father, aged and skeptical, her mother, quiet and sorrowful, her brothers once ashamed of her sisters still tender in years. All who were within her house would be spared if the oath of the spies stood true. With every heartbeat, Rahab felt torn between the city of her birth and the promise of a people she did not know. But her eyes stayed on that scarlet line. It was her anchor now. Across the Jordan, the Israelite camp buzzed with tension. The spies had returned with news. The city was fortified, but its people were paralyzed by fear. "The Lord has truly given us the land," they declared to Joshua. But Joshua did not rally chariots or sharpen swords. Instead, he called priests and Levites, not generals. He ordered the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God on earth, to be carried by priests. 7 other priests would walk before it, blowing ram's horns. Behind them, armed men would march, but not a word would be spoken by the warriors. Silence was the command. For 6 days, Israel would march once around the city. No arrows, no shouting. Just the soft tread of thousands of feet and the eerie drone of trumpets. The battle plan wasn't written by military logic, but by divine design. God was about to show Jericho that this war would not be won by might, but by obedience. On the first morning, the gates of Jericho were shut tight. Its inhabitants watched with narrowed eyes as an army approached, different from any they'd seen. No siege towers, no war cries. Just priests, an ark and circling feet. Rahab stood at her window, her family now gathered inside. Her father stared at the rope in disbelief. This thread will save us?" "Yes," she said, her voice unshaken. All day the Israelites marched. Not a stone was thrown, not a voice was raised. And as the sun set, they returned to their camp, leaving Jericho bewildered. On the second day, they came again. And again, silence. Some in Jericho laughed, others trembled. Still others mocked Rahab. "Your saviors are cowards." But Rahab wasn't listening to the jeers. She was watching their rhythm, and in her heart, she believed, each day repeated the same. By the 6th day, Jericho had grown restless, but Rahab was now resolute. The silence to her was not weakness. It was anticipation. The 7th day dawned unusually early. The Israelite camp rose before light, and their columns began marching toward Jericho as the first hints of sun kissed the horizon. But this time, they didn't stop after one circuit. They marched again, twice, thrice. By the fourth lap, the city was no longer mocking. By the fifth, even children were crying. On the sixth, a hush fell, and on the seventh circuit, the priests halted. The ark stood still. Then came the blast of the trumpets, a long, piercing cry that seemed to shake the very stones of Jericho. Joshua's voice rang out like thunder. "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." Tens of thousands of voices erupted. It wasn't a war cry, it was worship, and the power behind it cracked the heavens. The earth groaned, the walls trembled. Like brittle clay, the mighty walls of Jericho crumbled. Stone upon stone split and collapsed in an avalanche of dust. And terror, the ground buckled, towers fell like trees in a storm. Screams pierced the air as houses caved in, dreams shattered. But one wall stood untouched, the segment where Rahab's house rested. It was no accident, no coincidence. It was divine preservation. The scarlet cord flapped in the rising dust, a defiant banner against destruction. Rahab clutched her mother's hand as the house shook but did not fall. Her siblings huddled together, weeping, not from fear but awe. Outside, the city burned, but within her walls was peace. As the Israelites stormed the ruins, they bypassed Rahab's house. Joshua had given strict orders. Bring out the woman and all who belonged to her. And so into the smoke and rubble came the spies, not as fugitives, but as saviors. They found her just as they'd left her, waiting by faith, scarlet thread still shining like the blood of a promise. The smoke from Jericho's fires curled into the sky like incense to an unseen deity. Ash and ruin blanketed the streets where just days ago merchants bartered, children played, and priests of Baal offered sacrifices. But amidst the chaos, salvation had arrived. The two spies, covered in dust and urgency, climbed the broken remnants of the wall to reach Rahab's home. Inside, Rahab stood tall, not as a harlot but as a heroine. Around her, her family trembled, not in terror but in reverence. Her father, once doubtful, now wept. Her mother, who had rarely spoken words of affirmation, held Rahab's face in her hands and said, "You have saved us." The spies did not linger. "We must go, now." They led Rahab and her entire household down through the rubble, away from the stench of burning timber and the collapse of Canaanite pride. As they crossed into the camp of Israel, Rahab looked back only once, not in longing, but in farewell. This city that once defined her was no more. She had been saved, not just from destruction, but from a life without purpose. The camp of Israel was a stark contrast to Jericho. Here, there were no temples to false gods, no drunken songs, no business of flesh and manipulation. Instead, there was order, reverence, and awe. Rahab and her family were placed just outside the center of the camp. Some Israelites looked upon her with suspicion. After all, she was a Canaanite, a prostitute, a woman of a conquered people. But others, including the spies, spoke of her bravery. They called her faithful, protector, even instrument of God. It wasn't easy. Rahab struggled to understand the laws of Moses. She marveled at the Ark of the Covenant, at the holiness of the tabernacle. She feared the fire of the Lord that hovered over the tent at night. Her family too had to adjust. No more idols, no more feasts to Baal, no more liberties they once took for granted. But Rahab, she embraced it. Her heart burned to know the God who had saved her. She listened at every gathering, studied every story, watched the rituals with wide eyes. Her past may have been stained, but her future was clothed in newness. Among the tribes of Judah was a man named Salmon. He was a prince of his house, descended from Nahshon, the leader of Judah during the Exodus. He was a man of character, honor, and deep devotion to Yahweh. Salmon heard of Rahab's story. He heard how she had defied her king, risked her life, and placed her faith in Israel's God before she ever saw his miracles firsthand. He was intrigued, not just by her courage, but by her transformation. They met one evening near the tabernacle, where Rahab had come to ask about the laws of purification. She expected judgment, perhaps a rebuke. Instead, Salmon spoke gently. "You tied a scarlet rope to your window," he said. "Now you've tied your heart to Yahweh. That makes you one of us." Rahab's heart stirred. Days turned to weeks. Conversations turned to prayers. Friendship deepened into love, not a love born of lust or transaction, as she had once known, but a sacred bond. Against all odds and tradition, Salmon took Rahab as his wife. Many gossiped, but none could deny that something divine had united them. Rahab's wedding was unlike any Jericho had ever known. No pagan chants, no drunken revelry, just a holy celebration under the canopy of stars. She was clothed not in red, but in white, linen signifying her new identity. Her vows were made before the elders and the priests. Her tears were tears of healing. When their first child was born, they named him Boaz, which means strength. Boaz would grow up hearing stories not just of the Red Sea and the Ten Commandments, but of his mother's faith. He would learn how she once lived on a wall marked by shame, and how she became a cornerstone in God's plan. Rahab, once cast out, now sat at family gatherings surrounded by Judahite women. Her in-laws saw her as a miracle. And slowly, her story changed from the harlot to the redeemed. And Boaz, he grew to become a man of kindness and integrity, a man who would one day redeem a Moabite widow named Ruth, showing that grace runs in the family. In the realm beyond time, where the veil between earth and spirit is lifted, Rahab's faith echoed louder than Jericho's collapse. In the scrolls of heaven, her name was not written among the infamous, but the faithful. Centuries later, a scroll would be penned by the writer of Hebrews, listing the heroes of faith. Beside the names of Abel, Enoch, Abraham, and Moses appeared a name no one expected. By faith, Rahab the Harlot did not perish with those who were disobedient. It wasn't her works. It wasn't her lineage. It wasn't her purity. It was her faith. And even further into the future, in the Gospel of Matthew, when the genealogy of the Messiah was recorded among patriarchs and prophets, her name stood, Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. She was the only woman of Canaanite origin mentioned by name in Christ's lineage. She was the only one from Jericho remembered by heaven, because heaven doesn't see as man sees. Heaven saw a woman who opened her door, risked her life, tied a cord, and believed. The scarlet cord remained. In time, Rahab would tell her son Boaz of its meaning. "It was the color of blood," she told him, "like the sacrifices you see at the altar. But this was different. This saved us without a sword." Boaz grew up hearing that story over and over until it became a part of his character, a reverence for grace, a compassion for the outsider, a keen eye for redemption. The scarlet cord became a symbol passed from heart to heart, even if never physically passed down, and in ways unseen, it traced through the generations, through Ruth, through Jesse, through David. It was more than a thread, it was a divine signature. Centuries later, another scarlet sign would appear, not in a window, but on a cross. Rahab's story wasn't just about Jericho's walls. It was about all walls, seen and unseen. The walls around her heart had been built long before Israel ever marched. Walls of shame, walls of survival, walls of hardened identity. "This is who I am," she once believed. "This is all I'll ever be." But those walls had to fall, and they did, brick by brick, through mercy, truth, and transformation. Her life stood as testimony that God isn't just in the business of conquering cities, but of healing souls. Every testimony begins with a crack in a wall. For Rahab, it was the moment she believed the stories about the God of Israel. For others, it may be a prayer, a confession, a surrender. If Rahab could preach to the world, she would not begin with, "I was righteous." She would begin with, "I was lost." Her life taught lessons that theology books struggle to capture. Grace chooses the unqualified. God didn't wait for Rahab to clean herself up. He stepped into her mess and offered mercy. Faith can be born in unlikely places. In a city soaked in idolatry, a woman of ill repute found truth. A single choice can alter destinies. Had Rahab sent the spies away, her family would have died. Instead, she became a matriarch of kings. Courage is faith in motion. She risked everything for a God she had never seen, and that faith rippled across centuries. To the Israelites, Rahab was a symbol of God's scandalous grace. To the Gentiles, she was proof that inclusion in God's kingdom isn't earned by bloodline but by belief. And to all who struggle with shame, she remains a beacon. Time passed like petals on the wind. Rahab lived to see her son Boaz become a man of repute. She lived to see Ruth, her daughter-in-law, stand under the same stars she once prayed beneath, holding Obed in her arms. Obed grew strong and wise, shepherded by the stories and strength of his heritage. He begot Jesse, and Jesse in turn begot David, Israel's shepherd, psalmist, warrior, and king. And so the legacy of Rahab was secured, not just in memory but in blood. She, a woman once scorned by society, had become the great-grandmother of Israel's greatest king. When David sat upon his throne in Jerusalem, beneath banners of glory and justice, the blood of a Canaanite prostitute flowed in his veins, not as a blemish, but as a badge of honor. Proof that God uses the forgotten, the fallen, the feared. Rahab was no longer just a name from Jericho. She had become a cornerstone in the house of royalty. Her story was whispered among women of Israel with reverence and awe. The scarlet cord Rahab once hung in her window had long since faded with time, but its legacy remained, woven invisibly into the very soul of Israel. Her faith had left a mark far more enduring than stone walls. Every time a leper was declared clean, every time an outsider joined the people of God, every time a man or woman stepped out of shame and into grace, Rahab's legacy echoed. Centuries later, another woman, Mary, would bear the Son of God, unknowingly carrying the seed of Rahab within her womb. And at Calvary, a scarlet thread returned. This time not of rope but of blood. Jesus, a descendant of Rahab, hung upon the cross. His blood, bright as the Canaanite cord, was visible for all to see. It, too, marked a household for salvation. Not one family, but the entire world. As the temple veil tore, as the ground quaked, another wall fell, the wall between God and man. And in that moment, the cord tied in Jericho found its truest fulfillment. Rahab's story may be ancient, but her choice is as fresh as today's sunrise. Each of us stands behind a wall, be it pride, guilt, trauma, addiction, failure, and each of us is faced with a decision, to trust in what we've built or to place faith in what God has promised. The spies came to Rahab as a test of trust. She passed. In your own life, opportunities may come in forms you don't expect. A broken relationship mended, a truth revealed, a challenge to step into the unknown. Will you tie your own scarlet cord, your declaration of faith, where others only see risk? God is still in the business of redeeming unlikely people. He's still using Rahabs to shape Ruths and raise up kings. So ask yourself, what rope hangs from your window? What proof marks your trust in the Lord? Final reflections and life lessons. When all is said and done, Rahab's life preaches a gospel stronger than sermons. Here are the timeless truths her story shouts across generations. Your past is not your prison. Rahab was known as a harlot, but that label couldn't hold her once she believed. Faith transforms legacy. One act of trust changed her lineage from ruin to royalty. God honors courage in crisis. She chose the path of danger in the name of truth, and it brought salvation. Grace looks for hearts, not resumes. The religious elite of Jericho perished, but the prostitute lived, because God sees the heart. Obedience must follow belief. Rahab didn't just believe in her heart. She tied the cord, gathered her family, and acted. God's redemption is generational. Her choice not only saved her household, but laid the foundation for the Messiah. The next time you read the genealogy in Matthew 1, pause at her name. Let it wash over you. Let it remind you that no one is beyond grace, that your past can be rewritten, that faith in action can change everything. Rahab's story is not just history, it's your invitation. Will you believe before you see? Will you open the door before the walls fall? Will you tie your own scarlet cord? Will you believe in the saving grace of our Lord Jesus Christ today? Rahab's story is not just history, it's prophecy for anyone who dares to believe that grace still seeks the undeserving. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections and insights in the comments below. Let's grow together in faith and understanding. If this story moved you, inspired you, or helped you see God's grace in a new light, don't forget to subscribe to Joint Heirs Bible Stories, where timeless stories come alive like never before. Like this video if it blessed you. Comment below with your favorite part of Rahab's journey, and share this with someone who needs to know your past does not define your destiny. Until next time, stay rooted in the Word, and remember, God writes the most beautiful stories from the most broken places. See you in the next story.